I loved him in silence for 10 years, until one day he found out. For 10 years, Lena had loved Ryan. Not in the way friends love each other, not in the casual, fleeting way people throw around the word love. No, Lena loved him in a way that made her heart ache, in a way that turned every shared moment into a quiet battle between happiness and heartbreak. She never told him. How could she? He was her best friend, the one person she couldn't afford to lose. They had met in college, two strangers who became inseparable over time. Ryan, with his effortless charm and easygoing nature, had a way of drawing people in. Lena? She was quieter, thoughtful, always listening, always understanding. Ryan would talk for hours about his dreams, his fears, his ambitions. And Lena? She soaked it all in, memorizing every little detail. His favorite coffee order, the way he ran his fingers through his hair when he was nervous, the way his laughter could fill an entire room. But Ryan never noticed the way Lena looked at him when he wasn't watching. He never realized how her heart skipped a beat when their hands brushed accidentally. He never knew that, for 10 years, she had been loving him in silence, too afraid that if she spoke, she would lose him forever. And so, Lena stayed by his side, smiling as if her heart wasn't breaking a little more every day. Because sometimes, loving someone meant never letting them know at all. Lena never meant to fall for Ryan. But love has a way of creeping in. Slow, quiet, unnoticed. Until one day, it's just there, filling every empty space in her heart. She had been his best friend for 10 years. 10 years of laughter, of inside jokes, of long drives with no destination. 10 years of standing beside him, watching him chase his dreams, his passions, and other girls. Ryan was the kind of person the world gravitated toward, effortlessly charming, with a smile that made people feel like they belonged. And Lena? She was the steady presence in his life, the one who knew how he took his coffee, the one who could hear the shift in his voice when something was wrong. But he never noticed the way her gaze lingered a second too long, or how she memorized the little things. His favorite songs, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his future. He never questioned why she always answered his late-night calls, why she never seemed to be in love with anyone else. Because to Ryan, Lena was his best friend, his constant, his safe place. And so she loved him in silence, never once daring to ask, what if? Never once telling him the truth, because if she did, she might lose him forever. Every day, Lena wrestled with the same question, should I tell him? It echoed in her mind like a constant refrain, haunting her when she woke up, when she lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, fighting the tears that never quite fell. She had been keeping her love for Ryan locked inside her heart for so long, but each day it became harder to breathe beneath the weight of it. She loved him so much, but what if telling him changed everything? What if it ruined everything? She knew him better than anyone. She understood the subtle way he laughed at his own jokes, the way his eyes crinkled when he was trying to hide his nerves. She knew the way he paused before making a decision, as if he was calculating every possible outcome. She was the person he turned to when he needed advice, the person who listened without judgment, without expectation. But what if he didn't feel the same way? What if confessing her love would shatter the foundation of their friendship, leaving nothing but a gaping hole between them? Could she bear that? Her heart screamed for him to know, for him to see her as something more than just his best friend. But every time she was on the verge of telling him, the fear of losing him held her back. So, she stayed silent. She kept it hidden, buried in the quietest corners of her heart. Because, maybe, just maybe, it was better to love him from afar than to risk the one thing that mattered most to her. It was never supposed to hurt this much. Lena watched as Ryan fell in love with Emily, the girl who had everything she couldn't give him. Emily was bright, confident, with a laugh that filled rooms the way sunshine fills a darkened sky. The kind of girl who didn't need to be asked how she felt. She wore her heart on her sleeve, and it was impossible not to notice. At first, Lena told herself she could handle it. She's just another girl, another chapter in his life. But the truth was, it stung. More than she had ever imagined. Ryan was excited. More than excited. He was alive around her. His eyes sparkled when he spoke about Emily, his voice softer, warmer. Lena saw the way he held her hand a little tighter, how he whispered things in her ear that once would have been reserved for their late-night talks. It was like watching him fall in love with a dream that wasn't hers to share. She tried to be happy for him, tried to pretend she wasn't losing a piece of herself every time they laughed together, every time Ryan looked at Emily the way he never looked at Lena. Lena stood at the edges, smiling, nodding, pretending she wasn't falling apart inside. But every moment spent watching them together made her realize just how much she had given up for the sake of their friendship. This wasn't just friendship anymore. As Ryan's world grew more colorful with Emily, Lena's world faded into the quiet shades of unspoken words and suppressed longing. And yet, she stayed. Because loving him from a distance was the closest she would ever get. On the outside, Lena smiled. She smiled whenever Ryan talked about Emily, his face lighting up with every new detail, how she'd made him laugh at dinner, how they'd spent hours talking about their future. He was happy, and that was all Lena had ever wanted for him. But inside, it was a different story. Every word he spoke about Emily felt like a weight pressing down on her chest, squeezing out the air until it was hard to breathe. Every laugh they shared, every inside joke that was no longer just theirs, was a reminder of the love she would never have. Still, she smiled. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself that as long as Ryan was happy, that's all that mattered. But there were moments, tiny, fleeting moments, when the truth would rise up, uninvited, and choke her. She would watch him, the way he looked at Emily, and pretend her heart wasn't breaking. She would laugh at his jokes, nod at his stories, even help him plan surprises for Emily, all the while drowning in the secret that she could never tell him. I love you. She sacrificed her own happiness for his. She gave him her time, her attention, her friendship, everything he needed. And when he needed her to listen, she was always there. But when she needed him to see her, to finally notice the way she felt, she knew it would never happen. And so, she kept it hidden. She kept it buried, tucked away in the corners of her heart where no one could see. Because loving him in silence was the price she paid to keep him in her life. It wasn't just the words. It was the moments. The small, sharp moments that cut deeper than anything Ryan could ever say. Lena had always prided herself on being strong, on being the best friend he could count on. But the longer she stayed silent, the heavier it became. The pain of attending his dates, of sitting beside him as he talked about his love stories, his dreams for the future with Emily. It was all too much. Every time they went out together, it felt like a cruel joke. She watched him hold Emily's hand the way she had always dreamed he would hold hers. She heard him laugh with her in that effortless way that Lena had never been able to achieve. And with every shared glance, every inside joke between them, Lena felt the walls closing in on her. The worst part? Pretending to be happy. She laughed at the right moments, gave her best advice when Ryan asked, cheered them on as they planned their future together. But inside, it was all a lie. Every smile was a mask, every word a shield. As her heart cracked a little more with each passing day, she kept telling herself that it didn't matter, that her love was unimportant, that what mattered was seeing him happy, even if that happiness didn't include her. But deep down, the truth was impossible to ignore. She couldn't pretend forever. The weight of her feelings, the ache in her chest, was becoming unbearable. Lena had always thought she could keep it together, but she couldn't fight the pain much longer. And so, she made a decision. She would do what she had to do, move on. If she could just let go of this silent love, if she could just stop pretending, maybe it would stop hurting. Maybe. Lena had always put Ryan's happiness above her own. It was a quiet, unspoken rule in their friendship, one that she had followed without question, because his joy meant everything to her. She saw the way his eyes lit up when Emily walked into the room, the way his entire world seemed to align every time they were together. And that was enough. As long as he was happy, Lena could live with the ache in her chest. She could endure the loneliness that would creep in every time he kissed her goodbye, knowing it wasn't her he was going home to. She could swallow down the bitterness that tried to rise when he gushed about his future with Emily, because it was the price she paid for the privilege of being near him. But the sacrifices, they piled up. She was the one who would console him after every fight with Emily, always offering the right words, the perfect advice, the understanding only a best friend could give. She would help him pick out gifts, plan surprise dates, and listen to every little detail about Emily's day. Because that was what best friends did, right? They helped each other, no matter how much it hurt. She hid her feelings behind every conversation, behind every laugh. She kept her pain locked away, convincing herself that her role in his life was enough. But the truth was, it never was. It was never enough to be just his best friend, but she did it anyway. Because if his happiness meant giving up her own, then she would make that sacrifice without hesitation. Lena would be whatever he needed her to be. Because loving him meant never asking for anything in return. Lena became an expert at hiding her pain. She had to, because if Ryan ever saw it, he might ask questions. Questions that would unravel everything she had worked so hard to protect. And she couldn't risk that. Not when his happiness was on the line. So, when he asked for her help in planning surprise dates for Emily, Lena smiled and said yes, her voice steady, her hands calm. She helped him pick out the perfect gift, the kind that would make Emily's eyes light up, the kind that would make her feel special. She helped him choose the right flowers, the ones that spoke of love in a way that only someone who had been in love for years could understand. And when the day came, she was there. She watched him prepare, the excitement in his eyes, the way he couldn't stop talking about how much he cared for Emily. Lena smiled through it all, pretending she wasn't dying inside. Pretending that helping him build a future with someone else didn't feel like a dagger through her heart. But she was good at it. She had mastered the art of hiding behind a smile, of covering the cracks in her heart with the simple act of supporting him. She stood by him when he needed advice, when he wanted someone to listen to his hopes and dreams for their future together. She encouraged him, reassured him, told him how perfect he and Emily were. All the while, her heart shattered a little more with every word. But she never let it show. Because she couldn't. She had to be the best friend he needed. She had to be the one he could count on, even if it meant swallowing every ounce of her own longing. Even if it meant hiding a love that would never be returned. After all, if supporting him made him happy, even at the expense of her own heart, then it was a sacrifice she would gladly make. There were days when the weight of it all became too much to bear. Lena would wake up with a smile on her face, ready to play her part as Ryan's best friend. But by the time the day ended, she would feel like she was carrying the entire world on her shoulders. The quiet ache of loving someone who would never love her back, the constant reminder that she was invisible in the way that mattered most. Every moment with him, every shared laugh, every kind word he said to her, only deepened the truth she could never escape. He would never look at her the way he looked at Emily. The emotional weight of it was suffocating. She would watch him fall deeper in love with someone else, and it felt like a slow, steady erosion of everything she had hoped for. It was a weight she carried every time they talked about their futures. His future with Emily, the life he imagined for the two of them, a life that had no place for her. Lena would sit there, nodding along, smiling as if it didn't tear her apart to hear it. But inside, her heart was breaking a little more each time, the pieces of her hope slowly crumbling. She told herself she should be happy for him, that this was what love was about, wanting the best for someone else, even if it meant burying her own desires. But sometimes, just sometimes, it felt like too much. The emotional weight of it all would settle in her chest like a stone. She had loved him for so long, given him so much of herself, but she was only a chapter in his life, never the one he would choose. And so, Lena kept walking alongside him, carrying the weight of her love in silence, never letting him know how heavy it had become. It had always been Lena's role to be the silent supporter, the one who listened, the one who comforted, the one who offered advice when things weren't going right. And when Ryan and Emily hit a rough patch, Lena was there. She could tell by the way he called her late at night, the urgency in his voice, the frustration that laced his words. "I don't know what's happening, Lena. We're just not connecting anymore. I thought things were perfect, but now everything feels off." Lena had heard it before. The cracks, the doubts, the quiet unraveling of something that had once seemed so certain. She had been through this cycle so many times, but this time, it felt different. This time, she had to hold back the desire to scream, "It's me, Ryan. I'm the one who's always been here. But she didn't. Instead, she listened. She always did. She let him talk for hours about the tension between him and Emily, about the moments they fought and couldn't make sense of. He poured his heart out to her, and Lena let him, giving him the advice he needed, helping him work through his emotions like she always had. Maybe you just need some space, she suggested softly, keeping her voice steady, hiding the quiet ache inside her chest. Sometimes, things just need time to settle. He sighed into the phone, his voice filled with relief, but also uncertainty. You're right. I don't know why I didn't see it sooner. Thanks for always being there for me, Lena. Her heart ached with the weight of it, but she smiled, because that was what best friends did. They gave, they helped, they stayed even when it hurt. And even though it felt like the last thread of her heart was fraying with every word he spoke, Lena swallowed her pain and held him up. She always had. She was the one who stayed, the one who supported him through everything. But what he couldn't see, what he would never understand, was that the more she helped him, the more she lost herself. Her love remained silent, invisible, something only she could feel. It was supposed to be a casual conversation, one of those late-night talks where they sat together, side by side, talking about everything and nothing at all. It had become a routine, one Lena had learned to treasure, even if it meant swallowing her own feelings every time. But that night, as they talked about relationships, about the future, about everything that wasn't her, Lena felt something shift. Ryan had been going on about Emily again, about how they had been through so much, how they'd reached a crossroads in their relationship. His voice was heavy with emotion, with a sadness that Lena had heard before but never quite like this. I just don't know, Lena, he said, running a hand through his hair. I wish I could find someone who understands me the way you do. You get me better than anyone else ever has. You're always there for me, no matter what. Lena's smile faltered, but she held it in place, knowing he needed her to be strong. She nodded along, offering her usual words of reassurance. Of course, Ryan. That's what friends are for. But then, as he turned to look at her, his words hung in the air, sharp and unintentional. You're like a sister to me, he said, his voice soft but final. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. A sister. Lena blinked, trying to hold back the sting of tears that threatened to break free. She had always known it, of course. Always known that she was nothing more than a constant in his life, a support system, a friend. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing him so casually define her as family, someone who would never be more than that, was like a door slamming shut in her face. She felt the world shift beneath her feet. The weight of everything she had kept hidden, everything she had sacrificed, suddenly felt unbearable. This is it, she thought, the walls closing in. This is the moment where it all finally breaks. Yeah, she whispered, her voice betraying none of the hurt she felt. I know. But inside, everything shattered. Lena had always loved him, always hoped that one day he might see her in a different light, that one day he might realize she was more than just a sister. But now, those words had sealed her fate. She was exactly what she had always feared. Nothing more than a shadow in his life, someone who would always be on the outside looking in. She forced herself to smile, even as her heart fractured beyond repair. Because she was Lena, and this was what she did. She put on a brave face, even when every part of her was breaking. The words lingered in Lena's mind long after Ryan had gone to bed. You're like a sister to me. They were simple words, ones she had heard 1,000 times before. But that night, they cut deeper than she ever expected. The sting of them was like a burning brand on her heart, marking the end of a chapter she had never been able to close. She had lived in the shadows of her unspoken love for years, quietly, patiently, pretending that being by his side was enough. But now, she could feel the weight of her love pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. She had sacrificed so much for him, put his happiness above hers every single day, and for what? To be told, once again, that she was family, nothing more than a placeholder in his life? Lena sat in the silence of her room, staring at the phone in her hand, replaying his words over and over. She had tried to make it work. She had tried to stay, to pretend it didn't hurt, to believe that one day things might change. But now, it was clear. It wasn't going to happen. She wiped the tear that had slipped down her cheek, taking a deep breath. It's time to move on. The thought felt like a betrayal. How could she move on from him, from everything they had built, from the love she had carried for so long? But she knew, deep down, that this was the only way to heal. She couldn't keep living in the shadows of his love for someone else. She couldn't keep pretending she was okay, smiling through the pain, when every part of her longed to be seen, to be loved, the way he loved Emily. So, she made a decision. It was time to let go. Lena stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the world beyond. I'll be okay, she told herself, though it felt like a lie. I have to be. The road ahead would be hard. Moving on was never as simple as just walking away. But she was tired. Tired of living in the quiet spaces between them. Tired of watching him love someone else. It was time to move on. Or at least try. Ryan was cleaning out his closet when he stumbled upon an old, dust-covered box. One that had been forgotten over time. Curiosity led him to open it, and inside, he found a collection of letters, notebooks, and photos. One of the notebooks caught his attention. It was small, weathered, and familiar. As he flipped through the pages, he realized it was Lena's. The words she had written over the years poured out in ink, raw and honest. His heart stopped when he came across a letter addressed to no one. To him, I've loved you for so long, and I'm afraid that you'll never see me the way I see you. The words hit him like a tidal wave. Ryan froze, unable to comprehend what he was reading. He kept reading, each sentence revealing a depth of emotion he had never known Lena to feel. I've always been here, always by your side, but I'm just the friend, the one you come to when things go wrong. And that's enough, I suppose. But I can't help wishing it could be more. Ryan's chest tightened. How had he never noticed? How had he been so blind to the pain Lena had been hiding for so long? The weight of it all crashed down on him, and for the first time, Ryan truly understood what he had unknowingly done to her. As Ryan read through Lena's letters, a heavy realization began to settle over him. The words she had written were filled with a quiet ache, a love she had carried for so long, hidden behind smiles and the comfortable ease of their friendship. She had loved me all along. His heart sank as the truth became undeniable. All the times she had been there for him, all the moments they shared, and yet, he had never once seen the love she had poured into every word, every gesture. Lena had been carrying this secret, silently loving him, while he remained oblivious. She had never told him, never once let him see the depth of her feelings, choosing instead to stand by his side as a friend, even when it was breaking her. He went back to the beginning of the letters, reading each one with new eyes. She had always been there, supporting him through every heartbreak, every doubt, every time he had poured out his feelings about Emily. But it was never her he turned to for comfort. It was always Emily. Now, as he sat with the letters in his hands, he realized how much he had taken for granted, how much he had overlooked. Ryan felt a wave of guilt rush through him. How could he have been so blind? How could he have not seen the pain behind Lena's smile, the quiet sadness she carried for so long? The love she had given him was nothing like the easy love he had with Emily. It was patient, selfless, and without expectation. But he had never understood it, never truly seen it for what it was. And now, the weight of his ignorance hit him hard. Lena had given him everything she had, but he had never been able to give her the one thing she wanted most, his love. As Ryan sat there, holding the letters, his mind began to race. The words on the pages blurred as memories flooded back. Moments he had long forgotten, moments he had taken for granted. The times when Lena had stayed up late with him, listening to him talk about his latest struggles with Emily, offering advice without hesitation. He remembered how she always made him laugh, even when he was at his lowest. But it was more than that. There had been something in her eyes, a softness, a depth that he had never truly noticed before. He thought back to their countless days spent together, those lazy afternoons when she'd offered to help him with anything, even the smallest tasks. He remembered how she would always ask if he was okay, even when he'd never returned the question. She'd always been the one to reach out, to make sure he felt heard, loved, and cared for. But she was the one who needed that love, he realized, and it crushed him. He could see it now, the way she had always been there, standing in the background of his life, quietly waiting, quietly loving him. Every time he told her about Emily, every time he'd leaned on her for support, Lena had given it freely, never asking for anything in return. There was the time when he had been heartbroken over an argument with Emily. Lena had come over to his place, sat with him for hours, holding his hand and telling him everything would be okay, even though she was the one in pain. And then there was the day they had spent at the beach, laughing and joking like old times. He had felt free, happy, surrounded by friends. But now, looking back, he could see the quiet sadness in her eyes, the way she had laughed a little too loudly, the way she had kept her distance, as if she didn't want him to see the hurt that had been simmering beneath the surface. She had been carrying it all alone, he thought, and the weight of that realization nearly broke him. The guilt he felt now was unbearable. He had never known, never even suspected, how deeply she had loved him, and how silently she had suffered in the shadows of their friendship. But now, in the quiet of his room, with the letters in his hands, everything was clear. He had taken her for granted, and now he had lost her. Ryan couldn't stay still. The weight of what he'd read, the memories that now clung to his every thought, were driving him to the edge. He needed to see Lena, needed to look her in the eyes and ask the question that had been haunting him since he found the letters. Why didn't you ever tell me? He found her at their usual spot, a quiet park bench by the lake, the place where they had shared so many quiet moments together. Lena sat there, her head tilted toward the sky, as if she was trying to find peace in the calm. But Ryan knew her too well. He could see the way her shoulders were tense, the way her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She was always good at hiding her feelings, but he could read her now. "Lena," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly. She turned to face him, her eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't expected him to show up, not like this. He could see the mask she wore, the one that hid the vulnerability underneath. She smiled, but it was forced, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, Ryan," she said, her voice steady, but he could hear the tremor beneath it. He stepped closer, his heart racing. The letters were still fresh in his mind, each word they contained burning into him. The guilt, the regret, it was all too much to bear. "Lena," he repeated, trying to find the right words. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Her face softened, but there was sadness in her eyes, a resignation that broke his heart. She knew exactly what he was talking about. "Tell you what, Ryan?" she asked quietly, her gaze flicking away from his. "That I loved you? That I've loved you for years? That I've always been here, waiting for you to see me?" Ryan's throat tightened, but he couldn't look away. "Yes," he whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" Lena looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with an ocean of emotions, pain, frustration, and an undeniable love she had never let him see. "Because I was afraid." He frowned, stepping closer. "Afraid? Of what?" "Afraid that if I told you, you'd never look at me the same way again," she said softly. "Afraid that it would ruin everything we had, and that you'd never be able to see me as anything but a friend." Ryan's heart broke as he took in her words, realizing how much she had held back. "Lena, She shook her head, cutting him off. "No, Ryan. I've been holding on to something that wasn't meant to be, and I'm okay with that now. I've learned to be." But Ryan wasn't okay with it. He couldn't be. Not after everything he had just discovered. He reached out, his voice thick with emotion. "Lena, please don't say that. I didn't know. I never knew how you felt." She looked away, her tears threatening to fall. "You were never supposed to know." But Ryan couldn't accept that. He had always taken her for granted, always treated her like she was just the best friend who would always be there. But now, everything had changed. He couldn't lose her, not like this, not after finally realizing what he had let slip through his fingers. "Maybe I didn't see it before," Ryan said, his voice shaking. "But I see it now. I see everything now." Lena's eyes flickered with something. Hope, maybe, but it was fleeting. "It doesn't matter, Ryan. You're happy with Emily." You don't need me, not like this. He grabbed her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. Lena, I don't know what this is yet, but I need you. I've always needed you. I just never realized it until now. She pulled her hand away, her gaze falling to the ground. I can't do this, Ryan. I can't keep being the one you turn to when you need someone, but never the one you choose. Ryan stepped back, his heart sinking. But what if I do choose you now, Lena? Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, he saw the girl he had unknowingly broken. You can't just undo the years of silence, Ryan. You can't just decide to love me after all this time. He swallowed hard, his words coming out in a whisper. I know, but I want to try. Lena stood, wiping her eyes, her voice trembling. I don't know if it's enough, Ryan, but I've spent so long loving you from the sidelines. I don't even know how to be anything more. Ryan reached out, desperate. We'll figure it out together. I'm not asking you to just forget everything. I'm asking you to give me a chance to make it right. Lena hesitated, her breath shaky. I don't know if I can trust you, Ryan. Not after everything. But Ryan didn't let go. He couldn't. Because in that moment, he realized that he wasn't ready to lose her. Not before he even knew what it would feel like to love her the way she deserved. Lena, please, he whispered again. Give me the chance to love you the way you've always deserved. The silence between them hung heavy, but for the first time in years, Ryan felt a glimmer of hope. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for Lena's response, praying that her words would mirror his desire to make things right. But the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. Lena sighed, a sad smile playing on her lips, but there was no joy in it. She seemed distant, as though she had already made her peace with what she couldn't have. Her voice was soft, almost too soft to hear. Because your happiness was enough for me. The words cut through him like a knife, sharper than anything he had ever felt before. Ryan could see it in her eyes, the quiet resignation, the years of holding herself back, of putting his needs above her own. She had been the one who had silently loved him all along, yet never once asked for anything in return. She had sacrificed her own happiness, her own desires, just to see him happy. Ryan felt the weight of those words crushing him. Your happiness was enough for me. It wasn't just a statement. It was a lifetime of quiet pain, a life spent in the shadows, always giving without asking. I never wanted you to sacrifice your happiness for mine, Ryan whispered, his voice breaking. Lena shrugged lightly, the weight of everything she had carried settling in her posture. I never thought of it as a sacrifice. Loving you was always worth it, even if you never saw me the way I saw you. Ryan reached out to touch her arm, but she pulled away gently, as if she couldn't bear to let him in any more than she already had. I always thought that if I just stayed by your side, maybe, one day, you'd see me. But I know now, it wasn't meant to be, she continued, her voice steady but thick with emotion. And that's okay. I've come to terms with it. Ryan's throat tightened. It's not okay, he thought, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. Because in that moment, he realized how deeply he had failed her. She had been right there, always right there, and he had never truly seen her. I'm sorry, Lena. I've hurt you in ways I can't undo. His voice cracked, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of his mistakes. But I want to make it right. I don't want to lose you. Lena's smile faltered, a brief flicker of hope in her eyes, but it quickly disappeared. She looked away, and when she spoke again, her words were soft, almost a whisper. You never lost me, Ryan. I'll always be here for you. But I can't keep being the one who loves you in silence. I need to let go. The finality of her words hit him like a blow. He had taken her for granted, and now, he was about to lose her forever. Lena turned and began to walk away, the distance between them growing with every step. Ryan stood frozen, paralyzed by the truth that had finally set in. But even as she walked away, he knew he couldn't let her go without at least trying to make things right. Ryan stood there, watching Lena disappear into the distance, and for the first time, he truly understood the gravity of what he had lost. The guilt weighed down on him like a crushing storm. He had spent so many years focused on his own life, his own happiness, never once stopping to ask if Lena was okay. never once noticing the silent sacrifice she had been making for him. Did he regret it? Every part of him screamed yes. He had spent years seeking validation from others, pouring his heart out to Emily, believing that love would come easily, that it would fall into place without any effort. But with Lena, it had always been different. She had been there in the quiet moments, the hard times, the moments of uncertainty. She had always been the one person who truly understood him, even when he couldn't understand himself. Now, standing there in the silence, he realized that he had never truly seen her. He had never looked at her through the lens of love, at least, not in the way she deserved. And now, the weight of that knowledge was unbearable. Did he feel the same now? The answer was painfully clear. He felt more than the same. He felt everything. He felt the love that had always been there but had remained dormant, ignored, and untapped. He felt the ache in his chest as he realized that he had taken her for granted for too long. But was it enough? Was it enough to undo the years of silence, the years of waiting on her part? Could he fix what he had broken? Ryan couldn't answer those questions. All he knew now was that he had to try. He couldn't let Lena slip away without showing her, at the very least, that he had seen her, really seen her, for the first time. With a heavy heart, he took a step forward, knowing that this time, he couldn't afford to make the same mistake. Ryan's mind raced as he stood there, the park now empty, save for the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. He had lost track of time, lost track of everything except for the overwhelming truth that had finally hit him. Lena had always been the one who had been there, who had loved him quietly, patiently, without expecting anything in return. And he had been blind to her love, blind to her pain. But now, with the weight of his regret heavy in his chest, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't let her walk away. He couldn't let the best thing in his life slip through his fingers because of his own ignorance and fear. I have to tell her. Without thinking, Ryan turned and began to walk, his heart beating louder with each step. He needed to find Lena, needed to tell her everything he had kept hidden for far too long. The world seemed to move in slow motion as he made his way through the park, his mind consumed by the truth that had only just become clear. When he found her, she was sitting on the same bench, her face turned down as if lost in thought. But as he approached, she looked up, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with the unspoken words that hung in the space like a storm ready to break. Ryan took a deep breath, the words he had longed to say finally spilling out. "Lena," he started, his voice hoarse. "I was blind. I didn't see you. I didn't see how much you were hurting, how much you were giving, all the while expecting nothing in return." She shook her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter now, Ryan." But he couldn't let her go without trying, without telling her the truth. "It does matter, Lena, because I was a fool, and I let you go without ever telling you how I felt. I was too caught up in my own life to see that you were the one who had always been there, the one who truly loved me." Lena's eyes softened, but there was still a sadness there, a quiet acceptance that hurt him more than he could express. "I never thought you'd love me like that, Ryan," she whispered. "I never thought you'd see me the way I see you." Ryan knelt down in front of her, his heart pounding as he searched her eyes for any sign of hope. "I see you now, Lena, and I can't let you go without telling you, without showing you, that I feel the same way. I've always felt the same way. I just didn't know it until it was almost too late." For the first time, Lena's smile was real. It was small, fragile, but it reached her eyes, and it made Ryan's heart soar. "I've waited for so long to hear you say that," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to know, Ryan, do you really mean it? Or is this just a moment of regret?" Ryan took her hand in his gaze never leaving hers. "I mean it. I've always meant it, but I was too afraid to admit it. I was afraid of losing everything, afraid that if I told you how I felt, I'd ruin what we had. But now, I can't imagine my life without you. Not anymore." Lena's eyes filled with tears, but they were different now. Tears of hope, not sorrow. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to put pressure on you, Ryan. I just wanted to be there for you. In whatever way I could. Ryan shook his head, his thumb brushing across her hand. I know, but you deserve more than that, Lena. You deserve all the love I can give you. I want to give you that if you'll let me. The silence between them was filled with a new understanding, a new beginning. Lena squeezed his hand gently, a tear slipping down her cheek. You're not too late, Ryan. I've always loved you, and I'll always be here if you want me to be. Ryan's heart swelled with emotion as he pulled her into a hug, holding her close, knowing that this was the start of something new, something they both deserved. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would be more challenges to face. But in that moment, Ryan knew one thing for sure. He was no longer blind, and he would never take Lena's love for granted again.